Sure.
Good morning, Aparna.
Good morning, Arif. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thank you. It's so nice of you to give us your time to talk about you as a person and languages. You got a very diversified knowledge about languages. So in this interview, we're going to talk about that. So thank you for being part of a meaningful conversation.
Thank you so much, Arif. It's a pleasure being here with you.
Thank you. So as we go along, we will get to know you and we'll get to know what you do. But as far as we have talked about, you teach languages. You're a professor, and you do so many things, and not only one language, but you teach multi languages and you speak also multi languages.
Yes. Yes.
So if you put all this together, Aparna, what would it make Aparna today?
Well, that's a question that will encompass several things, I think the first most important feature of language teaching and language learning has been my experience with people, connecting me immediately with people. And it doesn't matter what background they come from, what community they come from, but it's just that instant connection. I find that when you speak with someone in their own language or a language that they're comfortable with, there's an instant connection. And that is something that has been the most important takeaway for me as a language teacher and a learner. And so these personal connections makes life, endlessly fascinating, because then I have the opportunity to talk to people at a level that is quite intimate and gives us personal space also, you see. So that has been one of the most enjoyable and fascinating parts of language teaching and learning.
Yeah, really. I think languages are really fascinating. But this question always comes to my mind, like, why one would want to learn another language?
Right. Well, I think the intentions and the goals are very different. They differ from person to person. Most people learn it for pleasure. Like I teach French at the Alliance Française of Hyderabad, where I'm presently located in India, and I find that most people who enroll for our classes are very interested in learning a new culture. So to discover a new culture, to probably visit that country, because it's not a bilingual country, nor is it a country where English is spoken widely. So for daily conversations, daily interactions, a little bit of the local flavor is needed, the local native language is needed. And so most people learn it for pleasure, and the others have very professional goals and ambitions. Either they want to study in France or they want to work there eventually. Or there are some who would like to immigrate to Canada. So very specific goals, but there are a large number of people who learn it simply for the beauty and the pleasure of learning a new language, and therefore connecting to a new culture, a new way of being, a new way of looking at the world. So there are different kinds of people who we encounter in our daily interactions. Yes.
Yeah, I know you're connected with many groups, many communities, and some of the communities you're connected with are not book a club, but learning a club.
Yes.
So if you put this, like a learning language,
yes.
and the learning in large with the rest of the world, with your colleagues, with your community, I'm wondering, like learning a language, how much does it have of expanding your consciousness and deal with day-to-day life?
Right. I would say that it works on on multiple layers. You see, it's a very multidimensional kind of a learning, because initially you really have to come out of your shell and accept that I don't know something to be able to learn something. And the next step is to unlearn. First of all, you say, I don't know. And next, you say, okay, I have already learned something a certain way, whether it's English or in my own native language. And so I have to unlearn some of these interfering patterns that might, stop me from acquiring a new language. And then the true learning starts. And that learning can happen on several levels. Like I said, it's a multi-layered approach. So the first thing is, like a little child, one goes back to learning everything very instinctively, in a very childlike, innocent fashion, when you're repeating things and when you're learning things just by listening and using your sensorial inputs. And then the cognitive aspect comes in at a later stage, when you can actually recognize the letters and you can form sentences and you figure out how it works. And so that's when the mental and cognitive capacities start falling into place. And at a much later stage, when you're a lot more comfortable and you're a lot more confident with the language, then you begin to explore the cultural aspects. And that is when your uh, consciousness, as you would call it, starts beginning to expand in its own way, because then you adapt to a different way of thinking, because every culture has something in common with all other cultures. That's the human aspect of life. But then there are also some particularities, some wonderful, extraordinary, exceptional qualities. And when I start exploring that unknown part of some other culture, a human community, any other place, any other culture, that allows my own consciousness of who I am, how I'm placed in the world, how I'm placed in this large universal community, all of that starts expanding. And then I learn how to use something called as an intercultural approach. So I begin to look at my own culture through different eyes, through new eyes, while I'm discovering someone else's culture at the same time and appreciating the values that I'm learning from this new culture, and I'm adapting to my own culture, or just looking at them and saying, well, everything works differently, and yet there's something that is universal amongst everyone, so that's how I suppose it adds to this expansion of one's own consciousness, and the desire to move beyond what is normally considered as just mine and myself kind of approach, you see. So that way it turns out to be a very enriching process. And when we teach a new language, whether it be a foreign language or another regional language in our own country, somehow, all these aspects come into play. And that's another reason why this whole experience can be quite extraordinary, you see.
Yeah, beautiful. I like the way you connected the language and expansion of consciousness with the culture, and I want to touch on that in a minute. But
Yes.
all of this, what you have shared with me so far, how much does it have impact on you, and in which way did it impact you personally?
Right. So the first ever foreign language that I picked up was German when I was about 17 years old. I'm
Mm,
47 now. So that was a long time ago. That was a summer course. And I loved it because the approach was so refreshing and it was something new. And there was always this challenge of having to acquire something new. And for a while later, I couldn't get back to it immediately, but then I went back a few years later when I was working, about, I might have been in my 20s, and I could easily adapt to it. I realized that I could take to it very easily. That pause, that period of not having been in touch with the language all the time didn't matter at all. And when I moved cities, I realized that I didn't have the opportunity to pursue German, and that's when I took to French. And that really turned out to be a huge turning point in my professional and my personal capacity as a teacher. I had already been teaching English, so this added a completely new dimension to my teaching profile. I spent about 6 years picking up the language itself, learning the nuances, and then 2 whole years of being on probation, training to be a professor, and then went to France on a very short training trip. So came back, and then I've been teaching for the past 12 years now. So that has really impacted my life in terms of my professional growth and personally, the fact that I mentioned earlier, I have so many connections. And I don't need to work hard at it. You know, I don't need to get onto LinkedIn. I don't get onto any other social media network. It's just so vibrant. You know, anyone who walks into my class is already a friend. So that's how it has been. And I think that way, personally, I've had an extremely wonderful time with all my friends. I call them mes amis. I call them mes chers amis. That means my dear friends. And and we all learn together. There are times when I learn from them, and for the most part, they learn from me. But it's a shared kind of an environment. So that works both ways, and that has been the most beautiful part of this journey.
Beautiful, beautiful. Uh, you mentioned social media, and
Yes,
in today's context, like, you know, when you look at social media, be it LinkedIn, be it any other platform,
yes.
as a professional, you know, you're professor of teaching languages, and you know, linguistics, semantics, and all these language jargons. How do you look at the social media language today?
I think it's a wonderful part of the evolution of any language, right? I mean, I think all of us as children, we developed code language so that others could, you know, if we didn't want to be discovered by someone, we had little secrets to share. We always had little code languages amongst ourselves as children. And if you notice, it's the younger age group which is completely immersed in a new kind of, lingo that is very popular. And so I think it's all part of the language. It's an evolution, it's a different kind of aspect that will obviously grow with time and with different circumstances, with changing socio-economic circumstances. So I think it's very natural. And there was a time when, during the colonial period, when it was absolutely forbidden to use any native words in the English dictionary. But
Mm,
today, even some of the most popular and widely renowned dictionaries have included words from different languages, a lot of Indian words, and from what are their former colonies. You see, so that's just the evolution of the language, and that's what keeps it so vibrant. And I think we're all also moving towards a more multicultural world. You know, if we're talking about a network and social networks at that, there are no boundaries left. There are no, okay, yes, in terms of politics, in terms of economics, we have these strict boundaries. But beyond that, people have managed to simply cut through all these barriers with their interactions online. So language is what keeps it going, and it's quite, the intimate part of that whole process.
so as a professional, it doesn't bother you to see the language get, I wouldn't say misused, you know, like kind of changed terminologies, and instead of saying language, say lingo. You know, it doesn't bother you as a professional,
No,
does it?
not at all. Not at all. In
Okay.
fact, as part of our language teaching strategy in our French institute, we also give our students a glimpse of the more colloquial usage of the French, the way youngsters speak, adolescents. We even give them a little peek into the cuss words. So, I mean, it's all part of life, right? At all points in life. I think it's more of being inclusive rather than exclusive. And I don't come from a purely grammatical point of view or a purely semantical point of view. For
Yeah.
me, it means evolution, and it means acceptance of different kinds of people, different kinds of expression. So that's just it. Yes.
It's a beautiful way to look at it as and positive as well. Uh, so, for example, like when I was studying English literature, I studied English literature for 1 year, and I studied Shakespeare. And then
Right.
when I was reading Shakespeare, I thought, I told myself, and I told actually the teacher, is I thought Shakespeare is English.
Yes.
And so my question is, why, if I speak English, why would I study Shakespeare language? And how does it impact me? What does it add to me?
Well, I think as far as Shakespeare, since you mentioned him particularly, most courses that are taught all over the world and in India, because that's my experience as someone who's done a master's degree in English literature, we read several plays of Shakespeare, and it's got to do more with the way the curriculum is designed. In terms of starting with, say, the Middle Ages, and then going on to the Elizabethan period, because it was a period of Reformation, of Renaissance. So that's the reason why that's one of the reasons why we are asked to look into some of the themes, and it's not just the language, it's also the themes, and the themes that are intricately described and woven into his works are universal. So even if in the 21st century I continue to teach Shakespeare to my students, it's because the themes are so relatable. The children relate to them, they grasp them immediately. The language they get past in the beginning, it's kind of a hurdle because it's all old English, and they struggle with it a bit. But once they get a hang of it, they look past all of that and they understand that this is what is happening. These are the equations between the characters. This is how the plot works out. So it all works out quite smoothly in the end. So I feel when we look at, say, ancient writers, or we look at a different way of expressing an idea, it could be in the English language, it could be ancient English, ancient languages, say like Sanskrit, or it could be Latin, it could be Hebrew, any other old language. It's the essence of what is being conveyed that is important, not so much as the language by itself. And I think if that first hurdle of overcoming the semantics of that language are done with, then the beauty of that shines through. The
Hmm.
treasures that are hidden, that is the most important thing.
Yeah, I still struggle when I hear, that kind of language, and I say, why do we have to learn it, and how are we going to use it? But you mentioned also semantic quite often.
Yes.
How much language has impact, or does it interlink with AI, artificial intelligence today?
Right. Well, mm, all of us are very aware of, the strides that, robotics and artificial intelligence has made in the real world right now as we speak. We have such programs running in our homes all the time. And naturally, the language that is built into these machines, okay, is a lot to do, is more or less from the cultural specific background of that particular place. And eventually, they might have to look into, again, the evolutionary bit, how can it become more personalized? As of now, it's very universal, it's very culture specific in the sense, uh, and also it's very general. So at some point in time, it might diversify into specific groups and specific communities. A lot of the chatbots that are used for several companies use chatbots, and they have their assistants who answer your queries. So it's all fed in. You see, it's all typically follows a program, and therefore it's more into coding and the kind of programs that are behind the functioning of these machines or these other kind of software programs. So I suppose again it will diversify in terms of regional or group specific kind of language. Eventually, may not happen that soon. It depends on the demand that is generated for such assistance and for such help. But I'm not very sure whether the people who are programming these, who are creating these programs, whether they're looking as deeply into the semantic value of what is being said. I feel like it's still very surface level. So it's still quite nascent in some areas, while in other areas it has gone way beyond. So we'll just have to wait and see how it works out.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, in communication, when we teach in management or leadership or in communication context, we always bring about the study that says words has only, of the language, 7%, where the
Right.
38% is more of tonality and deflection
Yes.
on the voice,
Right.
and 53, I think, it's about body language.
Yes.
So if you add the body language and the tonality, it's 93%
Yes, absolutely.
of the communication between human being, between
Yes.
us.
Yes.
So why, how do you look at the only 7% that's only related to words and language?
In which context, Arif, if I may ask you?
In
Because I think it depends on the context.
yeah. And in the communication, like, in a corporate context or in relationship context, the way we express ourselves mainly with words, but that only has 7%. But then there is the other 93%. It's not given, I would say, importance.
Right.
But when we speak today about languages, when we speak about semantic and grammar and lingo, all about words.
Right. So how would you like me to address that question? I mean, if you could just focus
Yeah,
on
yeah.
one bit and tell me
I'm
how.
just reflecting here, Aparna, is
Yes.
when we put so much emphasis in the language,
Right.
uh, which is mainly written words or spoken words, which
Right.
is only contains
Small part of the whole
7%
process. Right.
of the whole
Right.
process of communication. As a professional, as a language teacher, how do you look at that, and how do you see this formula? Is it true? Is it?
Well, I really haven't looked at this percentage-wise distribution of the importance of communication. Yes, I do know that body language and verbal cues, non-verbal cues, all of that play a huge role in effective communication. So during any kind of language learning, ideally, it should be a judicious mix, particularly in the early days, of gestures, a lot of gestures. It's like a little play that has to be enacted for students to understand and to be able to connect facial expressions, body language, gestures, and the sounds that are being, because it's all a series of sounds, right? It doesn't even make sense unless someone draws your attention to it and say, okay, this is what it really means. So initial learning, particularly the way we have been trained to teach French, has always centered around a lot of gestures and nonverbal cues, a lot of imitations, something like dumb charades, this popular game that is played out. And so the teacher wears many hats. It's not just standing there and reeling off things, but also, drawing little funny things on the board, or, imitating something, or just play acting. So role play becomes quite an important part of any language learning exercise. And so I would think that, you know, the more formal aspects or the more structural aspects of the language come in at a slightly later stage, and that too with learners who are mostly adults, not with children. And I also find that the more you're immersed in a particular language, in terms of the environment, the ambience, the easily you pick it up. You don't really need too much of structural support. But if you're far removed from a situation like that, then you would require some structural support a little later, not immediately, and particularly for adults. So that has been my experience. And I use gestures all the time. I use facial expressions while I teach my students. And well, I think that from all my personal interactions, there's nothing like you know, expressing oneself with just the eyes or with just, you know, a flick of the eyebrows. So there are many nuances in the way communication takes place. Even with the corporate communication in a meeting, body language, even if a person has a very stoic expression, one can know immediately by very subtle cues about what's happening and how to go about, you know, breaking the ice with someone or whatever. So there are multiple stimuli, there are multiple you know, signs that help communication. And I think I'm not very comfortable with this breakup. I'm sure whoever's come up with that might have done a lot of research. But from my experience, from my personal experience, so far it has not proven to be a problem or a challenge in any way.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna go crazy with my questions, Aparna, so
That's all
pardon
right.
me.
Yes.
And as a profession in your field and a professional in the language field, uh, do you think we are getting into using less language and using more symbols, more cues, you know, body language, more emojis, more
Yes.
pictures, like, you know, when you go to restaurants, when you go to bathroom, airports, you see symbols, you know, like
Yes.
symbols of the toilet, symbols of the prayer room, you know. Do you think we're, as we evolution of a humanity or of human being, are we moving to non-verbal language?
I don't know. I really can't say. But you see, I think everything plays a role in the evolution of the language. I mean, I don't know what our earliest ancestors spoke. You know, if it was even a language. If you look at prehistoric caves, there are beautiful drawings on the walls of the caves,
Mm-hmm.
and they're with colors and, you know, vibrant scenes of hunting and whatnot. And so maybe it is part of human nature to express ourselves in that way too, you know, little symbols to show something. And then don't forget that there are cultural specificities. So this is a universal symbol. If I see, you know, if I want to use a washroom, if I see that symbol there, I know that's a washroom. And I don't need language. I don't need to know English. I don't need to know any other language. I know where I'm heading, and that's most important. So I guess there are different ways to look at it. And I don't think that unless there's a massive revolution in the way people think and behave, I think human beings are going to be as expressive as they can be, and different forms of expression. So the symbols, art, painting, sculpture, anything that is creative expression is all part of human expression, right? And language being one of the parts of that kind of creative expression. So people choose poetry, people choose songs and stories and whatnot. I mean, the list is endless. So I think it's all part of the human experience, and choosing a form of expression that suits us best, and then choosing certain symbols or symbology, using this kind of symbology to cut across all other kind of you know, barriers that will get in the way of effective communication. It's all about effective communication, actually. It's not just about communication. I mean, you and I can communicate and I cannot understand at all. I may not be able to understand you at all. How can I make it effective? That might just be the turning point, you know, which might decide which way our human race will head. Non-verbal, verbal, we don't know. As of now, I think it's a good mix. And there are very few people who use emojis. I don't think everyone likes them and everyone uses them. Uh, but we know where to draw the line, you know. So that's how I think. But well, it just, again, it's another facet of human evolution. Like I, spoke about the language that is being used on social media these days. The emojis and the all of that goes in the same territory. So uh, when we didn't have the emojis and we started using the computers, we used all the punctuation marks to show how we felt, a little smiley. Or we even draw that, right? We draw stick figures. So it's just an extension of that, a more sophisticated version of all the little things that we used to do as little kids. Yes.
So I have two remaining questions. One question, I want to link it to the culture, and the other
Yes.
question is, how to move forward and
Right.
from here, and how to use the language in a time like this. But let me start with the culture, Aparna. Is
Yes.
you spoke about the caveman, they have simple, and then slowly, the evolution of the words and the sounds, and it came along. So how much today the language plays in shaping the culture?
Well, I would say that language is an integral part of one's culture. I mean, we're identified by the language that we speak. Now, India is a multilingual, multicultural country. And although there are about, and I don't have the exact number, but we have about 18 or 19 official languages besides English. And then in every region, there are dialects, and there are thousands of different languages. And each of these languages is connected to a specific community or a group or a tribe. And all of them have their place. Some of them don't have scripts. It's mostly the oral tradition. So songs and dances and verbal expression, non-verbal expression, all of that becomes a very important part of the literary traditions or the cultural traditions of that community. Most other languages that have a script have other forms of expression as well, the more traditional forms of expression or common forms of expression. So I would say it's a very integral part of one's culture, and it defines, it gives one an identity. And also I think that's also another reason why I would connect back to what I said first. It helps one make an instant connection with another person. Oh, the other one speaks my language. And
Mm.
that makes an instant connection. He or she understands me. And therefore, that language becomes a bridge. And then other things can slowly build around it.
Well, another thing is a thread is connected to this question. And
Yes.
I think, touching on it is very important, shaping the culture and the
Yes.
language itself. So we see, I want to connect it with the humility. So we see
Yes.
some of the language, like, when you hear it, you feel it's humble. The people that speaks it, they speak it with a humility. But we
Yes.
also see some languages, even when they speak, they raise their shoulder, they speak with a
Right.
pride. And, how has that come along? I mean, we're all human beings, but
Yes.
how is the language made one less or more, humble than others?
I think that's more of a personal sort of a first. Or there are two aspects that strike me. The first one is, I think, a sense of chauvinism. The same language that can unite can become divisive against other people, you see. And so there is this idea of chauvinism that my language is the best, my culture is the best. And that comes from, I think, indoctrination, some kind of propaganda that is built up in a community. And so there could be an individual, there could be a group of individuals who have not seen the beauty of sharing and have only focused on the beauty of being, on their idea of beauty being exclusive, not inclusive. So that would be one aspect. And the other aspect would be this sense of identity, again, being very focused on some aspects and not the universal aspects. You see? So the same language can be spoken, like you said, in a very humble way, in a very modest manner, and the same words can be turned with the intonation and more aggressive body language, can turn into something really ugly, right? So again, it's all part of effective communication and the kind of conditioning that children grow up in, the environment that they grow up in, the conditioning that is being that they're subjected to ever since they're born. So in most Indian languages, there is an informal usage and a formal usage, the way we address people. So our parents and our elders in the community are always addressed with great respect. And only if they give us the permission to address them differently, we can do so. And sometimes in certain communities in India, even little babies and children are spoken to in a very formal way, So it all depends on how that group looks at language. Is it a tool to unite or to claim exclusive status? And unfortunately, I mean, we don't live in a utopian world, though we are crazy, idealists, and that's why we're trying to have this meaningful conversation. We would want things to be very idealistic and very, near perfect. I wouldn't say perfect, but near perfect. Why look at the barriers when you can look at everything that lies beyond all of that? But unfortunately, that's just how the world has evolved with the I, me, my syndrome, I and mine syndrome. Everything has just sort of turned into, this individualism has really torn apart many communities. So that sense of mooring, that sense of togetherness has been lost. And I find that sense of togetherness in a lot of traditional societies, which are still holding on to some of their very ancient values, ancient wisdom. And so these kind of communities reflect that in their behavior towards others, the gentleness of their speech or their gestures, their kindness. It shows up through so many ways, you see.
Do you have to be a linguistic, or do you have to teach languages to be kind to people?
Not at all. I mean, that's just something that comes very spontaneously, I suppose.
It's more of a human.
You don't have to say a word to be kind. You just have to do, sir. Right. Do, just show it.
Absolutely.
In fact, Arif, I remember watching this film. It's a Hollywood film. There was this movie called Bruce Almighty with Jim Carrey in it. It's an American film. So he decides to be God one day. He doesn't decide, he's given the boon to be God one day. And initially he takes his gifts very lightly. He fools around and he does all sorts of crazy things. But then when he starts hearing prayers from every corner of the globe, and he realizes, my God, how am I going to solve everyone's problems? And that's when he becomes more responsible in the powers that he has been invested with. So something similar, a second part to that movie came out called Ivan Almighty, where you have Noah's story, of the ark and building the ark and all that. So between the two, somewhere I read about ARK, which is really an acronym for a random act of kindness. So you don't have to do it because you want to be kind, but because you just are. And therefore, nobody has to tell you, please do this, do that for me, will you do this? No, you just go ahead and do it to whoever you think will benefit from it. And that random act of kindness can really spark off a huge chain and you wouldn't be any wiser. It doesn't matter even if you know about it or you don't. So that is something that has stayed with me, ever since I saw that movie. And everything that has happened to me over the course of my life has only taught me this lesson, Just one tiny word, or not even a word, just a smile can change someone's life forever. That's how I've always looked at it. So language, no, not needed sometimes or most times.
I think you're setting the pace towards the end of the interview regarding the semantic and the kind of words that you use to bring out your kindness, verbally or non-verbally. So uh, being in the past period, a few months, you know, being in a such situation, and
Yes.
the whole world is being traumatic about the virus and the fear that the whole, you know, all nation is living.
Yes.
Uh, Going forward in the future,
Yes.
what would be some of the semantics, some of the words that we would be using to help you to cope and go through life
Right.
and to be in a better place?
Yeah. Well, I think acceptance, first of all, Arif, that we're not this all-powerful species that controls the world, because we're not. A tiny speck of a creature can create complete havoc, and all your nuclear arsenal and your weapons and your governments and everything can just be completely neutralized within seconds. So acceptance that we are part of a larger whole, a larger being. The world that we live in is not just about humans and the human civilization. It is also about being part of the natural ecosystem, being sensitive to every other creature. It could be something even as tiny as that coronavirus that has set off all of this, but being sensitive that yes, and acknowledging that yes, that exists. As much as we want it to go away, we also have to accept that yes, it has come about, and now we have to be more sensitive to everything around us. So I would say acceptance, sensitivity to our place in this whole beautiful being that is there, life on planet Earth, and learning to harmonize our lives with our
Mm,
natural rhythms, because most of us have moved away from our natural lives, from a natural, a more nature-based life, may I put it that way,
right.
and we're so disconnected from that. So that has brought about a lot of anguish and pain, and a lot of artificial constructs which have not really helped us beyond making us rich or making us materially rich. And then when some kind of catastrophe happens, then everyone's wondering whatever hit us, how could this happen? So it's not something that is unusual. It has always been happening over the past. It's only that we need to become more conscient of our place in
Mm,
this whole natural system, see the connections with every other being, every other creature, whether they be plants, trees, animals, birds, whatever, and the natural resources that we have, and really work towards building a more sustainable kind of a life for us on our planet. Because everything's out there for all of us to see, plainly. So we don't need any more lectures, we don't need any more research. We just need to now work on ourselves. And the last word, I think, which will probably define the way we look at all of this, is to be responsible, to
mm.
take responsibility for one's own actions, for one's own well-being, and therefore promote the well-being of others, those who are around us, our friends, our family, and the larger community. So responsibility is quite an important word that will come up, hopefully. That if you're responsible for yourself and you know what this, you own your actions. I have done this. I own my actions. I own the consequences of those actions and how they impact others. That I suppose will make a greater impact in the days ahead. I hope. I hope
Yeah,
so.
I I like that. It's all about hope. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but we have is hope. We
Yes.
have to accept
Yes.
ourselves and accept what's uh, the others, who they are and what they are, and whatever is unseen or unexpected to come. And responsibility, taking responsibility. I think that's really a good package to live a
Yes.
life with. Yeah.
Yes.
Is there anything at the end of the interview you would like to say before we end it?
No, well, I'm Well, I think I've had my say. I've brought in some of the thoughts that have been foremost in my mind during these few months of the lockdown and being, having to stay at home. I do know that a lot of people are finding it very difficult to adjust to this new kind of a experience. But personally, it has been quite an enriching experience for me because it gave me some time to do a lot of self introspection. I know a lot of people would probably think that's crazy. Who does that? But that's really the beginning of the whole ripple effect. You see, you look inward so that you can go outward and help whoever you can. And so that has been my journey. And I hope that at some point this would be everyone else's journey as well. uh, you know and who knows, we might still be able to create a utopia on earth. Don't have to
Well,
wait till you're dead and gone for paradise, but yes, it could just be
yeah,
possible right here, right now.
utopia or not, I think is just to, we'll see what happens tomorrow. Thank you
Yes.
so much, Aparna, for
Most
being
welcome,
part of
Arif.
the meaningful conversation. You brought a lot of aspects to the language and to the culture, and you packaged it with hope, responsibility, and acceptance. So thank you so much for doing that for
Most
us.
welcome. It
Thank
was
you.
a sheer pleasure being here with you and the rest of your team. I would really like to express my gratitude and my appreciation to you and the entire team behind the meaningful conversations. It has been an extremely, enriching experience in terms of just exchanging our ideas and thoughts. And I do hope that it will lead to greater expansion of our own understanding of ourselves and mutual interests and just reach out to as many people as possible.
Inshallah. Thank you so much. Thank
Inshallah
you.
too. Thank you so much. Thank you.